Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture CropTalk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentations today, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to this week's edition of CropTalk. June the 26th. Geez, June's gone so fast. And it seems like we haven't got a lot of crop advancing as fast as we were hoping, but it's definitely the cool weather and the rain that keeps coming that keeps seems to be slowing things down. So, but with that, we are seeing the crop developing, and we are seeing different stages out there. So we'll be talking about that throughout the day today. So for today, we have was talking with David Kaminsky this week, and we're talking about cereal leaf diseases, and it seems like it's going to be the potential anyways for a year where we might be seeing a lot of disease in a lot of the cereal crops. So thought it'd be maybe a good plan to go through a webinar regarding identifying the cereal leaf diseases, just giving us little bit of an update as to what to look for when we're out there scouting in the field, what we might have for problems, and how we can identify the different diseases. Because with some diseases we can do stuff with it, and with some things that are happening in the field we can't do anything about. So kind of go through that and get a little bit of an update from David. After that, we're going to go to the crop scouting panel. There's been a couple questions come in that we're going to address. Most of them right now have been regarding our pulse crops, and mainly our soybeans and our edible beans. And so we've got a few questions there. And then from that, we'll go through a crop update and finish the rest of our day off with that. So I guess with that, I'm going to see if David's ready to go. And if he is, we'll go into the cereal leaf disease presentation.
Okay, Lionel, I couldn't find any better headphones. So I'm hoping that if I speak slowly and clearly, you'll be able to hear me.
Sounds good, David.
I'm about to share my screen. And it will take me a minute to go to the presenter mode. There we are. Okay, can you see me now? Hello?
Hi, yeah, go ahead, David.
All right. Thanks, Lionel. Well, Lionel asked me earlier in the week, maybe the day before yesterday, to prepare something on cereal leaf diseases because the calls, texts, and emails are coming in thick and fast now. For the last 4 years of my tenure with Manitoba Agriculture, it's been dry, and it's not been much to do for a disease specialist, at least during the growing season. All the pressure is on John Gavloski and the insect pests. But this year is quite different from the start. It's been a wetter year. We're getting showers frequently. I just heard Dennis saying from the crop report that our growing degree days are lower than normal in most locations. I think right here at Carmen, we're pretty close to the 30-year average. But I would say wet and cool typifies our summer so far, or our spring, early summer. So this is what I want to talk about. I want to quickly look at the disease triangle. You've all heard this term, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means. Then we're going to go on to the major diseases. There I'm going to cover first tan spot and the septoria complex. Then we'll shift to rust, and we'll end up with bacterial diseases and the reasons that we treat those differently. And finally, I want to introduce a new tool It's actually been available for some time, but there was a launch of it earlier this week, and I mentioned it in last week's CropTest update. Sort of just mentioned it and said I'll be talking more about it this week in the next CropTest update, which comes out later today or tomorrow. And that thing is the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network. I know it's a mouthful, it's not pronounceable, but you're probably familiar with the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network, which is basically about insects. And Kim Brown tells me that there is also a weed monitoring network. So pathologists are late to the table, but nevertheless, we have this new tool for both tracking cereal diseases and eventually for kind of citizen science. That is, you reporting from the field what you're seeing, and that will give other growers and agronomists a heads up of what we're seeing in the area. Okay, the disease triangle. What's involved? Well, let's start with the infectious agent. That's the pathogen. It has to be here, and in most cases, it already is on crop residues, and it just needs the right conditions to manifest as disease. The rusts are a little bit different in that they blow into our region. So it's their arrival time, generally, that is the most important factor. Then we need a susceptible host plant. And there we look at the inherent genetic resistance that the breeders have built into the varieties we now have. And there's a real range. I encourage you to be in tune with and use that resource, Seed Manitoba, because it shows you for most of the commercially grown varieties, what is their disease reaction with respect to some individual diseases or to a group of diseases. And the third element of the triangle, which we have in spades this year, is a favorable environment for infection. And with most diseases, that means elevated levels of rainfall and or humidity. And each disease has its own preference. And I might touch on that briefly as we go. So first, let's cover tan spot and the Septoria complex. Now, the graphic that you see on the left is from that Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network, and it is a way of looking at the leaf area and how much of it has been affected by disease lesions and the essential differences between the two main diseases that we see on wheat on the leaves that are fungal diseases which reside or come from the residues of previous crops. So first, tan spot, because that one thrives on cool conditions, and we'll always see it earlier in the season than we do Septoria. The lesions can look fairly similar. With tan spot, you have dark coloration in the middle of the spot and lighter or even a yellow halo around the outside of the spot. With the Septoria complex, it's going to be lighter in the center of the lesion, maybe a darker margin. And I think that the depiction of leaf area covered by disease, that's more typical of Septoria complex, light in the middle, dark around the edge. But if you look with some magnification in the center of those spots, you will inevitably see these tiny dots like pepper, which are the asexual spore-producing structures in fungus. They're called pycnidia. Sorry about that. Caught a frog. And when it's wet, those ignidia will ooze spores in a gluey mass. They don't spread except by the impact of rain droplets. So they're moved by splash. The sexual stage of both of these leaf diseases is maintained on the residue of the previous crop, on the stems mostly that are in the field. Okay, some verbiage that goes along with this assessment of disease and percentage leaf area, and some relations between the amount of leaf area infected and the potential yield loss. It will differ between wheat. I'm not even going to talk about barley diseases, but between wheat and barley. And on barley, the important leaf to try to protect if you're using fungicides is the so-called penultimate leaf. That is the one below the flag. The flag leaf of barley is tiny compared to the flag of wheat. So it's probably those top two leaves in barley that contribute the most to yield and to head film, whereas on wheat, the flag leaf, the upper stem, even the glooms are important in grain film. I can share my presentation later on so you can look at these details more thoroughly. So also in last week's Manitoba Crop Test Update, which John rides us to get completed by 2 o'clock this afternoon, we had the report of stripe rust being found on both spring wheat and winter wheat from North Dakota. And I was suggesting that's still a little ways away. We're not hearing of big levels of infection there, and it may or may not arrive within the next couple of weeks. Well, this picture on the left came to me yesterday by text from Jason Boat, and one of the agronomists who works with Jason, Stephanie Stenson, has taken this picture, and that is leaf rust on spring wheat from just north of Carmen around Elm Creek. Where did that come from? Well, this is the curious thing that you'll find in cereal rust bulletins. These are reverse trajectories that show where the upper level wind currents have come from. And this is starting with Selkirk, Manitoba, and looking back over the last week. I think the map is as of the 16th of June. So it's looking at the week just prior to that. And we have this unusual event, the red line, of strong winds coming from the Pacific Northwest, specifically Washington, Oregon. And that's an area where they grow a fair amount of winter wheat, and they're often dealing with stripe rust. So the aretospores of stripe rust came from there, got to our border, and then blew north with some of these strong southerly winds. We have had strong southerly winds over Kansas and Nebraska, which are the two states we normally look at most closely for what we get blowing into our region with respect to the rust. Leaf rusts, both on wheat and barley. We have pretty good resistance built into the varieties that we grow. Actually, in spring wheat and winter wheat here in Canada and the prairies, we have fairly good resistance to stripe rust as well, with the range of intermediate to moderately resistant. Crown rust, which only affects oats, can be all over the map. We have some varieties that are fully susceptible, still commercially grown, and we have some that are up to moderately resistant. A little bit more on rust. Maybe I covered this in my previous slide, but down here is some more verbiage about the potential risk for stripe rust spores to continue to blow into our region. And what it's describing is kind of a rare occurrence, this appearance of stripe rust. I've only seen it one other time, and that was at the University Farm here in Carmen. And there I saw it on the fully susceptible spreader rows that are used in a nursery for tracking rust. And in that same year, really didn't see any symptoms on the commercial wheat that we're growing on the farm. Finally, I want to touch on bacterial diseases, which affect all of our crops. Here we have on the right, bacterial blights. Some may be described as halo blight, some just as common blight. And maybe the unifying feature is that bacteria ooze out onto the surface of the leaf in the sun. They dry there. They can be reactivated, but I take the leaves and kind of hold them up towards the sun, but looking at the surface, and you will see a little bit of a glint off of the surface of the leaf. And that's an indication of a bacterial disease, not a fungal disease. And of course, those are not controlled by fungicide. Now you can have both present, and on that same flag leaf on the right, lower right part of the picture, there are some lesions. That's probably tan spot. No, it's probably septoria, but it's not yet forming the pycnidia. Nevertheless, the infection is light with fungal disease, fairly heavy with the bacterial disease, and of course, fungicides have no effect on bacterial diseases. So a couple of years back, this is an anecdote, Réjean Picard, our ag rep out of Somerset at the time, he told me about a grower who had sprayed his oats 3 times with fungicide and it was still bad. Was this resistance? Réjean brought me some samples, and just looking at them, we could determine that this was a bacterial blight, not the fungal diseases like the Septoria complex and some others. It wasn't rust. Actually, the grower thought that it was crown rust on his oats. So it was a learning lesson. We'll put in a plug for the diagnostic school, which begins next week, runs for 2 weeks. Actually, we're pressing it into 4 days for agronomists, students, and others. We still have a few spots available. If you haven't yet registered, 1 day, Friday the 5th, is reserved for farmers. Sometimes they come on their own, sometimes they come sponsored by the commodity associations. Last thing I want to talk about is bacterial leaf streak. This may be an emerging disease. Again, a couple of years ago, when we had some torrential rains in that Manitoba, Nipawa area, to the point where they had flooding, intense rainfall events, some with hail. On a few varieties, we had bacterial leaf streak, BLS. And the thing is that with that disease, we don't have a handle on whether our varieties are resistant or fully susceptible. They do that kind of assessment, I'm told, in some of the northern states, but we haven't yet got that into our nurseries. This is a disease that's really caught the attention of the plant pathology community, and there are a lot of studies being initiated to begin to address that disease. So I think I've hammered on long enough, and I'll open it up for questions if there are any. That's how to contact me if you don't get your question in today. I'd prefer that you email me or text me. My Twitter handle, I rarely check it, so you might not get my attention that way. Maybe I'll put in a brief plug about the submission of pictures as diagnostic tools. They work, but they don't work on their own. First of all, they have to be quality pictures that show what you're seeing. And that is not out of focus, blurry pictures where your hand is in focus, but the leaf is not. That's not going to be helpful. Also, you can send me these by text, although it's better by email because we can get a much clearer and larger idea of what you're looking at. But I want your text, if you're sending me those, to be preceded by the verbiage, the words describing what you're seeing, the extent to which it's being seen, the crop, first of all. Sometimes we can't distinguish cereal leaves just by looking at the tips of them. So tell me the crop, tell me the variety, tell me the weather conditions recently, maybe the pattern of distribution in the field, and then tack on your pictures. I guess I'm preaching, but I hope I'm preaching to the converted. A lot of really good agronomists do send me good pictures. Also, they identify themselves. If I don't yet have you in my phone, you could tell me who you are, who you work for, kind of thing. Okay, now I'm really done and ready to take questions. I will let go of my screen, give it back to Lionel.
Okay, David, there's a couple of questions. One question I got is what variety, or do you know the variety of wheat that was showing rust in the Elm Creek area?
Oh, I want to check my notes to be sure. It might be, oh, I do remember now. It's Manus, Syngenta's Manus, which I think is a relatively new variety.
Okay, and were they going to be spraying for it?
I don't know. I haven't had a discussion with the agronomists involved. I would expect, depending on that plant, depending on where those symptoms were showing, they might want to hold until they're closer to, well, maybe even the T3 timing will take care of the disease. You have to judge the severity and potential for development into the upper part of the canopy. And I'll remind you that it's those upper leaves that contribute the most to head filling. So the objective of fungicide application is to protect the flag and or the penultimate leaf.
Okay, bacterial blight, does it affect one crop more than others? I seem to see it usually just in oats.
That's what we're most familiar with, Lionel. Yes, year over year we see it in oats, and usually there's enough moisture down within the canopy to drive the inoculum up from the residue of a previous crop. But with this bacterial leaf streak, I have to remind myself. Actually, some say streak, some say stripe. It is an organism, a bacterium known as Xanthomonas. Many of the others are Pseudomonas. This one is Xanthomonas. And we do find it on wheat, on barley, and on oats. The symptom that distinguishes it is that striped appearance, somewhat confined by the veins, not a general blotchiness on the leaves.
Does it start off as like a purplish type color on the leaf?
You mean like the tip of the leaf is red to purple?
Yeah.
I would say no.
Okay.
That is probably something stress related, probably non-pathogenic. In the very odd instance, it can be an indication of a viral disease, such as barley yellow dwarf virus. On oats in particular, it manifests as red leaves. It's actually called red leaf in oats. But no, red or purple discoloration at the tips of the leaves is not an indication of bacterial blights.
Okay, and then this question from me is, with all the wet conditions that we've been seeing, is mildew going to be an issue?
Oh, that's a good question. Mildews generally are seen later in the season. They're favored by, again, cooler conditions, but specifically the alternation of warm, dry days and cool nights, which are heavy dew forming conditions. Rainfall is actually inhibitory to the mildews. And here we're talking about the disease on quite a range of crops, and they are different pathogens that are specific. Perhaps the one I see with some regularity is powdery mildew on field peas. Although a condition of registration with field peas is now that they build in genetic resistance because it's a simple mechanism for determining that resistance. There are, however, things like forage peas that are susceptible. They don't have the same rules for registration. What else do I see powdery mildew on? Well, last year we saw it in some cases on canola. And that was the thing that was a cloud of gray-white dust, which coated your harvesting equipment, either swathers or combines. And it was seen mostly on late-seeded and hence later harvested crops, where the crop is still green into late August, early September.
Yeah, and I seem to see it every once in a while in winter wheat as well.
Okay, yes. Excuse me. Winter wheat is more advanced in stage. Sure, most of it has headed and flowered by now. And so it's getting to those later stages of development. And yet we're in a period of, those dew forming conditions, often dry during the day and cooling off significantly at night. So I think we can expect to see some powdery mildew on winter wheat this year. But as a disease that arrives late, or gets growing on the crop later in the season, it has less of a potential to impact yield.
Okay, and I hear you got a cough, or you got a. If just one last comment, if you could just maybe give I didn't get a chance to look and see what the fusarium map for Manitoba read, but I'm guessing it's high. Any comments on that?
Sorry, I muted myself just long enough to try and get rid of the frog. I haven't been completely successful in that. I looked at the forecast for spring wheat using the variety Brandon, which I'm growing in my plots at the diagnostic school. And it's a real patchwork for Manitoba, actually, going from high, those are the dark brown colors on the map, to high, red, and yellow, orange, medium, and even some areas of green, which indicates low risk right now. So I'd encourage you to go to that website and try it yourself if you haven't already. It's updated daily. And there was a quirk last week, which was a coding issue, and we alerted the the web people, the propeller heads who maintain the site, agronomists who were using the site could not put in the variety, and it was stopping them there, so they couldn't get to the map to the show results. I contacted Timmy Ojo, and he quickly got in touch with those people, and the problem was fixed in less than 24 hours. I hope we don't run into that again. But the website is prairiefhb, all one word, .ca.
Great. Thanks, David. Thanks for putting that presentation together. A lot of good information, I think, kind of timely as we are going out and seeing producers are finishing up weed control and getting into that fungicide stage of the crop. So I think it's good for them to be able to identify some of the stuff that's going on in the field. So thanks again for putting that together.
It was my pleasure, Lionel. And, thanks to those who are online today. I see some familiar names that maybe I'll be talking to later today.
Great. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the crop scouting panel. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've had a few questions this past week, and most of mine have been coming in, or a lot of mine have been coming in regarding the pulses. And so I first one's going to go out to Dennis, and actually there'll be probably a couple of them here. The first one I was seeing, went out and I got actually a couple pictures of his IDC in soybeans. So I thought a question for Dennis was just a little bit of an update. Producers are wondering, how long this is going to last. Is it something where the, excess of moisture is making it, or could extend the amount of time it's around? So Dennis, if you want to start with answering that one.
Yes, thanks, Lionel. First thing I want to state that soybeans in June always look ugly. They're never a pretty crop when they first start coming up. We're in this situation now where we've had some wet weather. The salt levels on some fields are higher, carbonates are higher, and we have what we're seeing on the screen right now with varieties that maybe have some susceptibility to iron chlorosis. Generally, if you give this a week, most varieties will grow out of it. If you've picked a variety based on having a variety that's a bit more tolerant, this will dissipate fairly quickly, usually within that week. But what you may want to take out of this is if you do see large areas of the field that have iron chlorosis, the first thing to double check is to check what the rating of that variety is, and you can get that information from Seed Manitoba. Anything that is 1.7 or scores of 1.7 in the guide or lower is tolerant. Anything that scores at 2.3 or higher, so that is susceptible. Those varieties tend to take a lot longer to come out of this situation. But a lot of times the varieties fall into that mid category, semi-tolerant, where they'll yellow. In this particular instance here, we do see some greenish veins showing up. So again, the biggest thing to do is just to kind of go away and not worry about it for a week. And then these beans typically will grow out of it. What I would also suggest is that make a note of the fields that you have more severe iron chlorosis. So the next time that particular field comes back into soybeans again, you can maybe pick a more tolerant variety. And I would also encourage you to do, when you do your soil test, get the soluble salts and carbonates test done, and reference the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Grower Soybean Fertility Fact Sheet, which will have some good information there on how to read that information and pick a variety that may be better suited to this situation. So,
okay, and for the one producer, he chose an early maturing variety. Are early maturing varieties more susceptible, or that's what he was asking. If he just wondered if maybe he shouldn't be looking at just an early maturing variety because of his location, he should be looking at some of the other things.
Well, it's a combination of things. If you go back, 10 or 15 years, when we first started growing soybeans in the West, we had some varieties that were highly susceptible in the early season category because at the time they were looking for varieties that were really early maturing and still yielded okay yet, or still yielded well. So sometimes certain things don't get introduced, certain genes don't get introduced. as it's progressed, I've noticed over the years that the early season varieties have been better, a lot better than what they were maybe about 10 years ago. But what you need to do is when you're picking your variety based on maturity, just go across the column and see what the rating score is. If it's a 2.3 or higher, that would be one variety that I would be cautious with about putting on a field that has high carbonates and high salts, because not only will you see this yellowing, but if it persists up to that, fourth or fifth trifoliate stage, you can actually see some yield loss. So over the years, I've had producers say, well, I'm never going to grow this variety again. It was early, but it didn't perform. And as I started quizzing on a soil test, we discovered that that particular variety had a very high IDC score and was not really the best variety for that particular field. If the carbonates and salts were lower, on a different field, it would have been just fine. But here, there were some instances here. So I would still focus on the maturity, but just, look at something that maybe has a better IDC score, something in that 1.7 range, because typically something like this, if I'm seeing this in the field, I'm thinking that particular area would probably score pretty close to a 2.3, just because of I can see some necrotic tissue and showing up there. But most times it grows out of it, especially when you get some warmer weather, but we just haven't had that lately.
Okay, and I guess one of the questions when I was out there, you said you look at the wheat stubble there, it was a pretty decent crop of wheat, and he was just wondering why but it's just that's the iron is the difference, I guess.
Well, it's the plant's inability to take up that iron, and it gets tied up in the soil. But that's where if you're looking at your carbonates and the soluble salts, those levels are probably fairly high, and that affects the way the plant takes up the iron. So at the end of the day, the bigger thing to do is every field right now has it that I've seen around. And again, it's varying degrees. Sometimes you see little low areas where there's more salts, but generally the plants will grow out of it fairly quickly. We do these ratings that you see in the guide. We do those ratings every year, and we're just started those ratings here this year. And even in some of the tolerant varieties, we're starting to see this yellowing as well. So, but again, it's usually very short-lived. It doesn't really affect yield. And like I say, the best cure for this is just to walk away for a week. It'll save you a lot of money.
Okay. While we're talking about soybeans and edible beans, I know you've been getting calls regarding hail and high wind damage, and just in general slow growth and slow comeback. Any more comments about that?
Well, I guess it's been a bit of a challenging year for soybeans and dry beans in areas where you have a little lighter soil, and we've had lots of wind and some hail mixed in there. Though some of those plants have really gotten beat up, and because we haven't had those warm conditions like we see some years, the plants are growing a lot slower, not covering the ground quite as quickly as what they have been in past years, and just because of the cooler conditions, we'll say overall. We're not seeing the rapid growth that we see some years. Now, most fields that I've looked at this year, like there have been some where on the dry bean side where growers have replanted because they had that option too, and it was before the deadline, the crop insurance deadline, they were able to replant. But for the soybeans, for the most part, some of the plants have gotten really beat up, but the terminal bud has looked good. Is still green and is growing through it. But again, we're looking at 7 days for them to kind of recover a little bit. That's given reasonably good growing conditions. And this year things are just a little bit behind when it comes to soybeans and the dry beans. But when it's all said and done, we got July and August here, and we're going to get some warm temperatures, I'm sure, in July, and these things are really going to pick up. And like I said earlier, soybeans always don't look pretty in June. They always look much better in July.
Okay, and one question from me, Dennis. When I know usually this time of year, I guess in the past would be a good time to check for nodulation and see how your treatments went or your for nodulation. Is it too early this year because of the slow growth, or could you be out there checking now to see if there's good nodules being produced?
Yeah, if you're in those early stages right now and you're digging up plants and you're at that first to second trifoliate, you should start to see some nodulation. You also, of course, want to cut them open just to make sure that they're nice and red inside. Nodulation and flowering really makes a difference as well. So, we're probably going to start to see, the next thing calls I'm going to get in the next little while is, we're, end of June here, and my soybeans are flowering and they're at the third node, or the third trifoliate stage. That does happen from time to time. We're in that stage now where we've changed, and it's triggered the flowering. So we're going to see some changes over the next little while. So I'm not surprised if I'm going to, in the next couple of weeks, if I'm going to be getting calls about that. But generally, the plants are just going to keep growing. They do grow right through flowering with the varieties that we grow here. But as far as nodulation goes, I'd be checking, make sure there's nodulation there. But for the most part, if you've done a liquid and granular inoculant on some of those no history fields where you've only had soybeans once, that would be the best way of ensuring good, successful nodulation. But for a lot of fields that we've been growing soybeans on for the last few years, we have quite a history there. So a lot of growers, especially in the East, have kind of gone away from using granular inoculant, have gone strictly liquid or maybe a liquid peat combination. And haven't had any nodulation issues at present, but it'd be a good time to start checking just to see what you have. But more critically is to check nodulation when they're flowering. So then, if you got good nodulation there, then that things are going to be good for you.
Okay, and then one question, what stage do you say the peas are in now?
Peas range anywhere from 8 to 10 nodes right now, and in the central region, we're already starting to see some flowering as well. So depending on when you planted, so cooler temperatures for flowering peas is always a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. So early flower would be close to the first time of application or first application of fungicide.
Yeah, and again, that becomes a discussion here that we'll have at diagnostic school next week with the agronomists there. We have a demo there, but that's when you really need to start looking. And again, some of the things to kind of keep in mind is you got to look for disease presence. So when you're looking for Microspirilla, you got to be going into that dense canopy and peeling back the canopy and looking for those purple freckles on the lower leaves. You look at things, what's the forecast over the next week or so? Are they forecasting rain? And how dense that canopy is. So those are some of the factors you got to look at. And I guess the ultimate goal there is spraying to protect the plant, but spraying at the correct time. Because if there's no disease present, then you may want to delay that first application. So that way you may be able to get away with only one application on spraying for Microspirilla. If, however, you're finding some disease starting to show up, and what I like to use is on the if you do a quick Google search and type in Microspirilla fact sheet from the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers, they have a nice little chart, and it walks through all the steps I just talked about and gives you a rating score. It looks at how wet the plants are in the morning, what the forecast is like, dense canopy, is disease present. If you go through that score and you come up with a number of 65 or higher, that tells you that you should be spraying. That tells you there's enough disease presence and conditions are right for spraying. If, however, you go through those steps and you're below that 65, then what I would do is it would come back about 4 days later and reevaluate and see if it's changed. This year, I would suspect with the cooler, wetter conditions that we're going to see more potential for some Microspirilla showing up this year. In past years, we've had it very dry, and growers have elected to either delay their spraying as long as they can to just have that first application, or in some instances where the stand was very thin, elected not to spray at all. But that's a lot rarer in peas than it would be in other crops.
Okay, and just one more question, and this will go to either yourself or Kim, and it's regarding Viper on soybeans. If they start flowering, or is there a stage where you need to be watching as to when you should or shouldn't be changing what you're spraying?
Okay, that you said Viper on peas?
No, on soybeans.
On soybeans. I'll throw that one over to Kim if she's on the line. So
yeah, I am. Can you guys hear me okay?
You bet.
Okay. Yeah, if they're flowering, normally the staging, I'm just looking at my guide right now, and you are like up to 3 fully expanded trifoliate leaves. So you are beyond staging on that. that is something that you're beyond staging, and I would expect to see quite a bit of yellowing and some damage there. So you want to get that product on early. If you've got beyond that stage and you haven't been able to get any chem on because of, the horrible spray conditions that we've had this whole spring, then that's something to maybe talk to your agronomist about some other options, maybe to try to stay on label, because I think you don't want to do anything to stress these plants even more. They're not growing as well as we want them to. We're definitely seeing some IDC, and the last thing you want to be doing is hammering them with chem when it's when you're beyond the stage.
Okay, so Dennis had mentioned flowering could start early. Well, I shouldn't say early, starting probably at the right time, but just early in their staging. We could see some flowering before the third trifoliate. Is that what you were saying, Dennis?
Yeah, a lot of times, not necessarily like if once we get to that second, third, we could start to see some early flowers on soybeans. But really, if you're going with if you're spraying soybeans, going, glyphosate is, we always stay up to the first pod showing up with straight glyphosate. So we have a little bit of time there. But again, I think the bigger question here is making sure that if you're spraying that second pass of whatever product, that you're going in there and you're scouting for those hard to kill weeds, those weeds that maybe got missed the first time, and you make sure that you evaluate what products that you're using to make sure that what's you're trying to go after is gonna take care of it, because it's that time where I've heard some reports about water hemp being discovered this year already, and that is something that we're going to have to keep in mind when you're going out and just going out for that second application, to make sure that you're spraying the right product at that time.
Good. Okay, thanks, guys. Okay, I think those were the questions that I had put together for this week from either calls or our fields that we're in. So that'll be it for the panel today. And I'm just going to have a few highlights of the crop report. So cereals, we're anywhere from 3 to 5, or probably 5-leaf stage in tillering, to early flag leaf, to even some early head starting to show in some of the crops. And I think right now the central region is probably the more advanced out of the province right now, and they're definitely seeing some heads starting to poke through in some of those crops. Winter wheat is heading, and I think we're probably past the point in most cases for fusarium application. Fall rye is in the head field stage already, so those crops are definitely well on their way. And grain corn is it's advancing, but it just needs the heat. We between them and kind of the crops that love the heat, like soybeans and sunflowers, we need the heat to get those crops growing. So that's where we're sitting in a lot of those crops. I would say out of the cereals, in my travels, probably we're, if we're not 60, we're close to 70% done weed control in a lot of areas. Some areas maybe not quite as far advanced, but there's still, and it's the wet conditions that have been holding guys off. Definitely a lot of planes in the air spraying, so I think we're catching up, but we still need a week of good weather before guys will be right caught up. Oil seeds, again, there's another crop that varies in staging. We've got some late seeded and some reseeded canola crops that are, cotyledon, well, past cotyledon, probably first to third leaf, and to cabbaging, to some areas in the province where it's bolting already. I would say most of it is getting to the stage where it's starting to cabbage, and within the next week here, we're going to see a lot of ground be covered. Just a side here, we talked earlier on this year about making sure you got your burn off done before the crop started coming up. And I was in a producer's field the other day here where they had Liberty canola 2 years ago, and he missed the burn off by a day. It's in Liberty Canola this year, and the field looks like it's about 25% bloom right now. So it would be almost prime stages for your application for sclerotinia. But lots of little canolas in the bottom, but just another fact about making sure you try to get your burn offs done in time, because it's going to create a problem for the rest of the year for on that field, that's for sure. Sunflowers, V6 to V8 stage, and flax, the 4 to 5 stage in flax. Again, sunflowers, if we could just get some heat, they would just start growing like crazy. So we just need a little bit of heat to keep them going. We talked enough about soybeans and the peas. I think we went through the staging there. I think right now there is just a matter of monitoring those fields, and like Dennis says, maybe on the soybeans, maybe go fishing for a week here and come back and see how things are looking. A few things. Crop diagnostic school. David mentioned a few things about that, and Dennis did as well. So July 3rd, 4th, the 9th is a postponed date, and it'll be the 10th and 11th. So that's for agronomists and students. July 6th is the Farmer Day. So if you're interested in going, the registration link is right there on the screen, and click on there and you'll get all the information for registering. And I don't know if Marla's on right now or not. Lori, is she on?
Nope, she
No.
was on, but she's not. But also, just a reminder, it was July 5th for Farmer's Day, not the 6th.
Yes, yeah, July 5th. Yeah, okay, sorry. I must have said the 6th. Yeah, okay. And our diversification centers, they're coming up with their tours. So July 25th, July 31st, August the 7th, and August the 8th. So all at different locations throughout the province. Pick one that's close to you, or pick one where when you go to their and learn about their agendas, so what's going to be happening, if you see some interesting stuff going on and you'd like to go to one or go to them all, there are definitely going to be some good stuff happening at each one of those. Here is the contact people for those different locations. So if you have any questions regarding what is going to be happening, what you're going to be seeing, what the event's going to be about, definitely don't be scared to give them a call to find out a little bit more information. My plan is to have the couple of crop talks in the near future with different locations, talking about what's going to be happening at their sites too. So keep in touch for that. Kim mentioned it again, field crop production guides. She was looking at hers to find some information. They're a never-ending source. I think if you haven't got one yet and you still need one, we're maybe getting close to the end of in-crop spraying for weeds, but we're definitely just going to be starting on a lot of fungicide applications. So just knowing the right timing, the right staging, and products you can use. Definitely that information will all be in the book. Hay listing. I haven't seen any hay being knocked down yet, but I think a lot of producers aren't very far off getting close to starting. So if you have some hay that you've been looking at marketing this year, our Manitoba hay listing is a place where you could get your information out there. Our crop production essential specialists, there's our contact information and our phone number. So if you have any questions about things that are going on in the field, feel free to give any one of us a call. We can do our best to give you a hand. Our livestock specialists, again, if you've got some questions regarding your herd or your pastures or your hay, these are the people that you can contact and you get information as to what you're looking for. Our service centers, there's their 1-800 numbers and locations, and make sure seeded acreage reports, I think, are due any day now. So definitely keep on top of that. and my contact information and Lori's contact information for Crop Talk. If you got any questions, got any ideas of future Crop Talks, or somebody you might want to hear on Crop Talk, please give us a call or let us know. And join us next week, July 3rd. We're into July already, so July 3rd for our next Crop Talk. Thanks for the presenters and the panel for answering the questions, and see you next week.